Alright, so more of the same stuff, except they're throwing a curveball at us. F of x, let me change that and make that a color. Let's do blue and green. F of x is 5x to the first power. Now remember, 5x to the negative 1 is really what? That's 5 over x to the first power, right? Remember, the negative gets tossed down to the bottom. So keep that in mind. And then they give us g of x. So when they say, I'll write this over here, f of g of x, we're going to write out f, which we know is 5 over, and then the stuff in parentheses, right? Because this is f of x. Now, we're going to have x in the denominator, so that's going to have an impact on the domain, which is why they ask us to state the domain. We need to be aware of that. So let's plug in g of x. All right. So on the next line, I'm going to say f of g of x is equal to 5 over, in parentheses, what's g of x? 3x minus 3. Okay? Now to state the domain, so that's it. That's all we're asked to do. We're not plugging in any numbers this time. But what is it that we know about a fraction? That the denominator cannot equal 0. So we just write that out. We know that 3x minus 3 cannot equal 0. Correct? This is how we find the domain. Well, you just solved this. We solved an equation. This is like an anti-equation, right? So I just add 3 to both sides. And I get 3x is equal to 3. Divide by 3. Divide by 3. Now, I put an equal sign here, but remember, this does not equal or cannot equal. So I get x. That's a poorly written 3. This is 3 over 3. Cannot equal, what's 3 divided by 3? 1. So for your domain, x is all real numbers, but x cannot equal 1. Does that make sense? Now there's a couple ways that you could write that. One way you could write it is you could say, well, you could say x is less than 1 and x is greater than 1, right? But not include the 1, right? So you could say something like x is less than 1, x is greater than 1. But because we don't have the equal sign, we're including every value on the number line except for 1. Does that make sense? All right, let's do part B. Do you guys have that written down? I'll leave that up there for just a second. While you guys are writing that down, I'm going to come back up here. Let me draw a little barrier here. So that was A. Let's do part B. So now for B, we're going to do G of f of x. Well, what was G? Well, G was 3x x minus 3, right? But what was f? Well, we'll plug that in on the next line. We're just going to plug in f of x wherever there's an x. So on the next line we say g of 3 times something minus 3. Well, f of x written in rational form is just 5 over x. And since we're going to have to multiply some fractions, I guess, isn't 3 the same as 3 over 1? Right? So we'll just leave it that way. So now on the next line, I've got g of f of x. Now remember, when you multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across, right? So 3 times 5 is just 15. 1 times x is just x. Minus 3. Now you could combine them and put them under one common denominator, but I'm okay with it being this way. But now we're asked to state the domain. And so, what is the domain? Well, the domain is all real numbers in most cases, but we only have two exceptions. One is you can't take the square root. Well, you can't take an even root of a negative number. And there are no even roots, and you can't have 0 in the denominator. In other words, x cannot equal 0. This is the denominator, right? That can't equal 0. And so how could you say that? Well, you could say x is less than 0, or x is greater than 0. Some textbooks will have it written like this. They'll say, they'll do like infinity, comma, 0, union, 0, comma, infinity. This should be negative infinity, by the way. I don't think we have that in your homework assignment. I don't think that's how it is in Big Ideas. Okay? So I'll leave that up there. Does anybody have any questions as we're cranking through this? Just because I'm recording the video doesn't mean you can't ask a question. Anybody? I encourage you to raise your hands. Alright, cool. Last one, we're going to do f of f. What? So what is f? Well, we know that f of x, f of x, this is funny. Normally it's 5 over x, but we're going to say 5 over f of x in parentheses. Now this one's going to be a little trickier because of the fractions, but that's okay. So then f of x, oops, I already screwed that up. So f of x is equal to 5 over, in parentheses, 5 over x, right? So here you have to think that your numerator 5 is being divided by the fraction 5 over x. Well, what happens when you divide by a fraction? You multiply by the reciprocal, so 5 is the same as 5 over 1. So in the next line I have 5 over 1 times the reciprocal, which is x over 5. When you multiply that out, you get 5x over 5. The 5's cancel. 5 divided by 5 is 1, so you're just left with f of, whoops, always throwing me off. F of x just equals x. Isn't that weird? We still got to state the domain. Do you see any even roots up there in our final answer? Is that underneath a fraction? Is that a denominator? No. So then the domain is all real numbers. In other words, I could plug in any number for x. Now your textbook will say all real numbers, but I'm a lazy mathematician and I say all reals. I can't be bothered with that extra word numbers. They both mean the same thing. Okay? Are there any questions on this? Okay, I'll leave that up there for a second for you.